Civil society groups and some political parties are putting pressure on President Cyril Ramaphosa over the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. They marched in Pretoria yesterday to show their opposition to clause number 4 as well as 5 of the BELA Act. During the march, there was also a display of the old South African flag. Former acting chief executive from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Professor Verne Harris, is now joining us to have this conversation. Prof, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. And I just need to quickly just lay down the context before I ask my questions, just so that our viewers understand as well. So the Nelson Mandela Foundation went to court to have the display of the apartheid flag be declared a gratuitous display of hate speech, which was upheld. Went all the way to the Supreme Court of Appeal with that application that was brought by AfriForum, and it was still upheld. So that deals specifically with the apartheid flag. But when it comes to the display of, for instance, the Vierkleur flag from the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic, which we know obviously was during the time of colonialism, does it carry the same symbolism as an apartheid flag?
No, thank you, Eldrin. So the ruling by the Supreme Court of Appeals was related specifically to the apartheid flag, but it did establish a precedent. It did establish a principle in law that symbols can also constitute hate speech. There is no case yet that gives us an indication in relation to the Vierkleur.
Yeah, and how should we understand the display of the Vierkleur? And this happened yesterday during the march as well, and we understand from the reports that the organizers had asked this particular individual as well to please leave the march itself. But how should we understand the symbolism of the Vierkleur being displayed at such a march, considering, of course, that this is happening at the Voortrekker Monument as well, and the march, in essence, is also about the protection of language, but more specifically, Afrikaans?
Well, the Vierkleur historically has been associated with various forms of Afrikaner nationalism. And you will remember perhaps the years in which the AWB would use the Vierkleur. So associated with a certain far-right white supremacism.
Yeah, and then I'm going to go back again to that court judgment that was handed down by the Supreme Court of Appeal, and making reference to the High Court judgment. It says the High Court found that any gratuitous display of the flag, aside from being racist and discriminatory, demonstrate a clear intention to be hurtful. Would you say that what this particular individual did was the clear intention to be hurtful?
You know, I have done a scan of the coverage of the event yesterday. I've seen photographs, a very short clip. I didn't see any of the old apartheid flag. I did see that one incident with the Vierkleur being rolled out. And I take note that this individual was asked to leave by the organizers. I think that's significant.
That is significant. But what does it also tell us about the country that we live in, and at least some of the individuals as well that still want to, I don't know, propagate perhaps maybe Afrikaner nationalism?
Well, it's disturbing. It's and profoundly disappointing. I think for me, just looking at those wide-angle shots of the crowd and this sea of orange, white and blue, which, you know, for so many of us resonates as the apartheid oranje blanje blow. Yeah. One doesn't know to what extent, you know, this was deliberately choreographed by the organizers, but the messaging for me was clear and very disturbing.
Clear and very disturbing. At the march was the leader of the Democratic Alliance, who's also part of a democratic state, part of the government of national unity. What responsibility does somebody like a John Steenhuisen, who's a Minister of Agriculture, carry in such instances?
Well, great responsibility. And, you know, it's important for our political leaders, particularly those who are now in the government of national unity, to understand that when they take up particular issues, like a piece of legislation or particular clauses in a piece of legislation, they're associating with a much broader messaging. In instances like the gathering yesterday and the march which took place. And they have to be aware of what that messaging is and how it lands with the majority of our people. And I would argue that the imagery and the messaging associated with it was hurtful to
Prof. Harris, okay, we seem to have lost the Prof there. We're going to see if we can quickly re-establish that line there to Prof. Harris, who is, of course, the former acting CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Remember that they had taken the matter around the apartheid flag being displayed publicly as a form of hate speech, being gratuitously displayed in public places as a form of hate speech, which the Supreme Court of Appeal had upheld, even though AfriForum had tried to challenge that particular finding. Okay, we unfortunately seem to be struggling there to get him back on the line, because one of the points that I wanted to raise as well is a question that is raised here by Professor Khumalo on X. Okay, we have Prof. Verne Harris back on the line. Prof, I just wanted to quickly say this. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Professor Khumalo asked this a bit earlier on, where we are promoting this conversation that we'll be having with you. And he asked, how does a people of a checkered past relate to their heritage and history? I'm genuinely curious. We despise the Afrikaner nation for having been the premise of apartheid, but Afrikaners as a people continue to exist. How do we relate to their heritage without being called fascist or longing for an oppressive past? Just curious. What's your take on that? Because the point is stressed that there are still South Africans, they're still part of a democratic state, however, though there is a particular history.
Well, for me, it's about weaving that history into other histories, weaving that past into the present that we're trying to make. And it is also about that principle of gratuitousness. There are displays which are not problematic, for example, of the old apartheid flag in a museum, for example, in scholarly work, and so on. So it's about the tapestry that South Africa is trying to build as a nation.
Yeah. And then how does South Africans in general then relate to Afrikaners and also that particular history? And again, to the point that Professor Khumalo makes, that they are part of the democratic state.
Well, undoubtedly they are. And, you know, you can see the many flags that represented of Afrikaner republics, voortrekkers, and so on, incorporated into the new national flag. So there's an inclusivity there. There's no intention to denigrate particular history or exclude particular groupings within our society.
Yeah, and then for organizations like AfriForum, again, AfriForum, a registered organization under the current democratic laws of the state, the responsibilities that they carry, even though they may have some of the members who want to push for an Afrikaner nationalism.
Well, I think you almost answer yourself there, Aldrin, is that clearly, as I said in relation to political leadership, party political leadership, that is, organizations which have large and significant constituencies carry a similar responsibility. And when you mobilize energy, you mobilize interest, you have to be very careful to ensure that those more extreme views and extreme manifestations are not allowed in your institutional space.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for that, Prof. Prof. Verne Harris there, who is the former acting CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation.